And just as economists had predicted, Nigeria's headline inflation rate climbed higher to a 17-year high, 19.4% in July, up from 18.60% recorded in June. This is according to the latest report released by the National Bureau of Statistics. The figure, which also marks the sixth consecutive monthly rise in inflation, is 2.27% higher on a year-on-year basis than 17.38% recorded in September 2005. A breakdown of the NBS data shows that Nigeria's urban inflation rate rose by 2.08% to 20.09% in July 2022 from 18.01% recorded July the previous year, while the rural inflation rate jumped from 16.75% to 19.22% on a year-on-year comparison. Both indexes were unchanged within the comparative month. Interestingly, the food inflation rate in July declined by 0.01% to 2.04% in month-on-month contrast against the 2.05% rate recorded in June 2022. And this is attributed to a reduction in the prices of basic food items such as garri, yams, maize and vegetables. Similarly, food inflation over the previous 12-month period dropped by average 1.42% to 18.75% from the average annual rate of 20.16% recorded in July 2021. The economic interpretation of the rising inflation number means that Nigerians are not able to purchase as much goods and services with their monies, as the value of their income has been eroded due to rising costs. Welcome back. Major events that shaped the year 2022. And from January, it really was a debate on fuel subsidy. And through the year, that sector has witnessed a lot, from the threat of subsidy removal to the alleged importation of bad fuel, if you remember, to scarcity, whether due to flooding or not. And let's not forget the discovery of crude oil theft in Nigeria. According to the federal government, Nigeria is losing $3.27 billion crude to thieves in 14 months. Well, the same multidimensional poverty index, that is the MPI, this also stared us in the face. And, well, to talk more about this, and this is talking about the economy, joining us here in Lagos is the Deputy President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We also have joining us from Abuja studio with Chamberlain there, an economist who's also a public policy scholar, Dr. Tokpe Fasua. Welcome to the program. And joining us via Zoom in London is a professor of economics with the University of Ibadan and visiting professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the United Kingdom, Professor Olawale Ogunkola. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so I'll begin with my guest here in Lagos. Your take on how the economy fared in 2022?
Well, we will not say it was as expected. It was far below what we expected, both in terms of the macro numbers, in terms of the growth for the year. We're hoping to get something like 3%, 4%, but we didn't get there. And then we had, in terms of sectors, a lot of sectors did not really do as much as we expected. But some sectors did extremely well. If you look at the ICT, for example, we did pretty well there, and it continues to grow. So it sort of compensated for some sectors that are not doing so well. Then, of course, agriculture was flat, because even though there was a lot of input in agriculture, the combination of security and the flood wiped out a lot of the expectations in that sector. And then you find that in between that, manufacturing continued to suffer because of the two key issues that they always had. There was power, there is infrastructure, and then the cost of raw materials because of imported inflation. The exchange rates kept spiraling out of any kind of control that CBN tried to put in place. And then you had the Ukraine-Russia war that came early in the year and throughout all the projections of exchange rates. So on the whole, not as much as one would expect.
You mentioned Russia, Ukraine. Let's go to Professor Gunkola, and this is your thoughts from that international outlook of how you think Nigeria's economy fared with all of the external impact.
Honestly, I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Just your thoughts on the impact from the international scene, how that impacted Nigeria's economy in 2022.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are many factors. We are an open economy. And when we say open, it implies that we do a lot of trade and we do so many things with international community. The first one has to do with the price of crude oil. Of course, you know the Ukrainian and Russian war, which is still on. But surprisingly for Nigeria, we are the only country, exporting oil country, that did not have substantial increase in the value of our oil. Again, the reason you know very well, it has to do with leakages in the production. So many barrels we're supposed to export, but we are unable because we do some sharp practices that reduce the amount of oil that is sold at international market. Again, we are part of the global system. You can see the effect of inflation. Though not only imported inflation, we have some other reasons why the inflation is so high, including the internal problems that we have in terms of production destruction because of insecurity. And in fact, we also imported some inflation, given that we are producing crude oil, but importing crude oil. So instead of the increase in price of the oil to be beneficial to us, it's more like a cost, because we need to do more in terms of blocking the leakages. Of course, the issue of the controversial fuel subsidy, which implies that the higher the oil price, the more the subsidy we pay. Also, ameliorated the positive impact we're supposed to have from some of these external development. The issue of food production, of course, you know the disruption we have, and importing food is also an expensive business. So instead of us being able to produce what we can consume, we are importing more of what we are not producing. So this created a lot of problems that we have currently in the economy.
Let's talk to Dr. Fasua in Abuja, and this is your thoughts on the policymakers. To them, fiscal, monetary, they put in place the best policies for the economy in 2022. What's your take?
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I think I'll just piggyback on what the professor from University of Ibadan has said. It is true that in 2022, we had quite a bit of losses in the agricultural sector, especially with the floods. You know, this year was perhaps the worst in a decade, and that came with a lot of losses. But also to mitigate that, I think that the government of the day has made quite a bit of investment in agriculture, some of which may not be immediately reaped, as it were. And then, of course, the thing is also that, you know, sometimes it plays out like that, you know. So there's been quite a bit of investment in agriculture. When we talk about some of the policies that try to reduce the importation of food crops, especially maybe when you talk about import substitution as a policy. Sometimes it's going to be medium to long term. For example, the production of rice, investment in rice, a lot of that will go to waste, but at least the kind of mentality is changing. And of course, the crude oil sector too has kind of recovered because at some point in September, we were producing less than 1 million barrels a day. But now, as at the end of November, we were back to being the largest producing in Africa. So we're now over 1 million and all of that. I'm very positive that in spite of all the challenges, that we seem to have crossed the Rubicon positively in Nigeria in terms of the economy.
But if you look at some of those figures from, for instance, the National Bureau of Statistics, they published their figure and they indicate there that the inflation rate rose for the 10th consecutive month in November.
Absolutely.
And then if you look at that, that's 21.47%.
Yes.
And that rose from 21.09% of what was recorded last year, November, about this time. And so that gives you roughly 6.7% higher than what we recorded the last time out.
Yes.
And so if you say you cross the Rubicon...
So we've crossed the Rubicon, because the thing about the inflation is that in economics, there's what we call the lag effect. Because sometimes it takes a while for policies to kick in. I think what many people may not get right regarding the inflation is that we are kind of underestimating the effect of COVID. COVID has a very long lag effect, future lead effect, if you like, because into the future, what they call lead effect. So COVID, the reanalysis of what a once in a lifetime, if you like, global shutdown, because if you look at 1918 to 1920, when they had the Spanish flu, they didn't have to shut down the world. But in 2020, when the world was now fully integrated, we now have a super globalized economies, we had to go to sleep, even if it was 6 months. In places like the UK, they are still suffering it. I mean, I was there recently. The manning levels in different shops was dismal. Service delivery has gone to pieces and all of that. And of course, so in a place like Nigeria, it's going to take a while to come. Now, as one of the professors said, so what we're seeing now is a supply side kind of inflation. Manufacturers are having to come back into production, but to a large extent, sourcing materials, raw materials and otherwise, including human resources, to get back on track is a lot more expensive. They have to put that back into the cost of their goods, which the final consumer must buy. That's the inflation you're seeing. Of course, in Europe, in America, they're seeing 50-year high inflation. So ours is about 20 years high inflation, as it is. But in no time, I believe, in maybe a quarter or two, we start to see a kind of plateauing and a depression of that inflation level. Of course, the Monetary Policy Committee keeps increasing the benchmark rate, the MPR.
Isn't that going to have its own effect?
Well, the idea is that, they also can't sit on their hands and think that, okay, the inflation is going to go away. So they want to try and see. And there's supposed to be a negative, relationship between interest rate levels and inflation, as it were. It hasn't started to have that. It started to have the effect for now. But in time, those actions, as well as other tapering, if you like, actions in other sectors of the economy, will lead to a plateauing of that inflation.
Let me understand your point. I mean, we've seen even oil prices, gas prices, pardon me, in the state, it came back down after it went high for a while. Are you saying, for instance, food inflation, petrol prices that we see here, are they going to level up and come down? Is that what it's just?
Well, okay. What we'll see around petrol will be what will be the effect of maybe a Dangote petroleum refining company coming into play, as well as other, modular refineries like Walter Smith, Owerri and Co. If we're able to get the security going, and I think luckily for us, we're seeing a kind of lull in all of these security challenges around the country. Now, so that if a Dangote refinery comes into play and we don't have to import petroleum refined anymore, that would lead to some accretion in our reserves, some more interest from foreign direct investors, some more stability in the value of the Naira. And therefore, if you have stability in the value of the Naira, coupled with these import substitution policies, then we would have less imported inflation. Okay, so the inflation that comes with having to import petroleum, which is the second largest importation that we do in Nigeria, second only to technology. The biggest importation we do every year in this country is technology. Talk about your computers, your everything, you know, your computers, your phones, your TVs, you know, different kind of equipment. Perhaps if you add even the software that we need for running many of our industries, that's the biggest import we do every year. The second is petroleum products. So imagine if that would leave, you know, the quantum of funding that we need to do in terms of, that will have reverberating effect on the economy. And that's why I said, I think that we're about to turn the Rubicon in terms of that. So in terms of food inflation, the flooding for this 2022 was a major factor, apart from the fact that even during COVID, farmers could not even go to farm. And when they went to farm, when they brought their product, okay, to them, there was no market open for them to even sell. So we had a lot of wastage in terms of in 2020 into 2021. But you notice that Nigeria was one of the first countries that pulled out of that global recession at that point in time. So our recovery rate, because we're not so, you know, we're not so tied per se to the global economy as maybe other countries in Europe and America, but our recovery rate was large because of the informal economy. Of course, the IT economy seems to be the fastest growing, but I think that we're not giving enough, you know, enough kudos to the informal economy that actually drives this country. Those resilient farmers, those resilient people who go to the market, those traders and co. They're the people that ensure that, look, you know, they weren't going to take no for an answer. Before you knew it, they were back in play.
And that informal economy is a huge component of the economy in this country. I wonder if Mr. Dahoste shares the same optimism about, for instance, food inflation, the transport cost. Should we be optimistic that perhaps moving forward, it will level up, as Mr. Fashua believes?
Well, as I said, if you look at the SME sector in Nigeria, during COVID, after COVID, they were clearly the first to recover, and they recovered very quickly. It's just demonstrated the resilience that has always been there. Sometimes it's a surprise to us Nigerians ourselves how we can quickly bounce back. And that is what has driven the recovery that we saw after COVID. Most small businesses that were held at home got up and found something to do because they just had to take care of themselves. So that translated into a lot of new businesses, a lot of innovations around what people were doing before. A lot of people shifted a little bit. If you were in entertainment or event center, you look for something else to do quickly. A lot of people went into food packaging, into processing, which they were not doing before. So that has continued to help us, and it will still be there. And that is what is actually sustaining the level of agriculture that we are seeing. So in spite of insecurity in general farmlands, we still manage to have our farmers go to do farming close to home. A lot of farmers now say, well, they can't go very far from home, but they still have to go to farms and do maybe a smaller size of farms and still produce something. And that is why also we haven't seen the level of scarcity of food that was feared, especially from COVID to the floods. That the food is still there. It's much more expensive, but the fact is that it is there. You go to the market, you still find the food, but it's much more expensive. So that resilience will continue to take us. But how fast we can completely recover is in doubt in terms of timing. Perhaps the first half of 2023, we will just about be climbing out of the worst situation we have this year. But the timing as to when some of those key events mentioned by Mr. Faswa will happen. For example, we have about 4 or 5 refineries, not just the big one. There are several refineries being rehabilitated around the country. There are small, medium-sized refineries that are almost completed. We start production in first or second quarter 2023. So as all these refineries start running and we start to reduce the importation, we begin to see some changes in the level of imported inflation. And once we can reduce imported inflation, which is pretty much about half, if not 3/4 of all inflation we are suffering. If we can reduce that is related to importing refined petroleum products, we will see a recovery that perhaps in the second half of 2023 will be much faster than what we are seeing now. So that is the hope, that some of these things happen, the refineries start working, we manage to get the farmland secure enough for farmers to venture out further, expand the size of the farms they are running, and be able to produce a lot more food and reduce the inflation that is directly related to the reduction in food production that we saw in this quarter and the last quarter.
About the optimism production of the modular refineries, the refineries working together, and the positives to come in 2023, the first quarter. But this brings to mind the issue of crude oil theft. Have we handled that? And let me ask. I'd like to ask Professor Ogunkola, and this is for you to give us kind of like your outlook of what you're seeing happening. I mean, the discoveries this year alone of crude oil theft, and if you think we have the capacity and the will to tackle that.
Well, I can hear you clearly, but if it is on crude oil theft, I think we need to do more in terms of security. We are focusing on crude oil theft because it's affecting us directly. There are many leakages in that system, and people are benefiting from weak regulatory system and enforcement. Stealing crude oil is not a small businessman that we do that. It is also people that know how these things work. So look at even the mineral resources. From information and from study that we have, some people are living large on this. So it's a whole system. Some people believe that it belongs to them and they should do whatever they want to do with this. That's one aspect of what we need to do. And I hope by the time we have new government, we have new strategies of blocking oil theft, especially, and also to look at all what belongs to Commonwealth in terms of how do we secure them and how do we ensure that once it gets to federation, it will also trickle down to those communities to address the problems that they have. You will remember there was a time when we used to have insecurity issues like kidnapping in the Niger Delta. My take is that they moved from that kind of nefarious activities to oil theft. It's like a kind of substitute. The question is, what can we do to address and be sure that we all believe that it is a commonwealth that should go to the common purse and that everybody will be fairly treated in that common purse. We also learned that mineral resources like gold and others are being cornered by some people, whether it's true or not. Those are the question of national question. Do we really believe in one entity? Is it the revenue sharing formula that's the issue that we need to address so that everybody will bring all the things to the center for us to share in the common purse? On the issue of inflation that was discussed earlier on, let me just say one or two things. There are many factors. You can talk about demand factor, you can talk about supply factor and so on. But to me, we need to do more in terms of coordination of policies, both monetary and physical policies. the coordination in terms of when CBN is trying to control inflation, the fiscal behavior is not moving in the same direction. As a country, we can do better, and we need to have coordination mechanism in place so that one party will not be doing the other party will be doing something that is contrary or negating the effect of what the other is doing.
Let me come to you, Mr. Idahosa, and that's flowing from the question of crude oil theft and the will, and also perhaps your thoughts in terms of the businessman or woman in Lagos, what it is they want, the kind of economy they want so that their businesses can thrive.
Well, just starting from the crude oil theft, where we are now is we are now doing about 1.5 million barrels per day, up from 1.1, at some point was 1 million. And it was because of a head-on fight with the operators of the fuel theft industry. It's an industry, but the government had to fight that industry and has been able to push back fuel theft maybe 50%. We need to get to about 1.9 to 2 million barrels a day to say we have really dealt with fuel theft. That's how the fuel theft situation is now and how much work needs to be done. In terms of the business, okay, Lagos, if we are saying Lagos and the business community in Lagos, essentially they are looking for a system that takes care of what the government can take care of. We are not expecting that government can do everything, but we are expecting that there are certain things that government can do. For example, government should be able to allow consistent flow of petroleum products. Whatever the price, if you want to subsidize or you don't want to subsidize, it should continue to flow. And government should be able to provide a city or a state where mobility is reasonable. In other words, if you don't have to spend 3-4 hours in traffic to get to where you are going, and you should spend 1 hour at the most, and you're spending 3 hours, the business community feels that that is not beyond the government to deal with. There are certain basic things that the government can do now. But going forward, we expect that it is a legitimate aspiration to expect to have consistent, uninterrupted power supply in Lagos. The reason is that the economy of Lagos by itself is capable of sustaining uninterrupted power supply at a price that it can easily afford, because most of the business in Lagos now is depending on self-generation. And it's clear to us as a business community that if we can have uninterrupted power supply, and we even have to pay 2 or 3 times what we are paying now, the business community will be very happy with that. So there are certain basic things that we think should be done, can be done, and we really think we should continue to engage with the stakeholders, not just government, but other stakeholders, to see that we address these things. We are not expecting as a business community that all the problems of the community will be resolved. Water, for example, a lot of people are not saying, give us water running in our homes. But let's address those key things. Let's have power, let's have mobility that is sensible and efficient for doing business. And it is possible, the government and the business community working to achieve it, without waiting for the whole of Nigeria to resolve our power problems, because that's a long shot. It's going to take a while. But for the business community in Lagos, we believe that the community and the government in Lagos can make these key objectives to be attained.
Dr. Fasua, on Mr. Idahosa's first point, access to fuel, petrol, and other materials, do you think that the question of fuel subsidy is a question that we must sit down and answer, talk about, removing fuel subsidy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that even the gentlemen that are angling to take over government come 2023 are already addressing that headlong. And I think most of them are promising to do the needful to remove the oil, the fuel subsidy, as it were. This is a question that must be addressed for several reasons. For the fact that there's so much magic involved. The last time I did an analysis of fuel consumption in Niger, Cameroon, Chad, and Republic of Benin, I realized that all these countries which are our neighbors all put together, they don't consume as much as a quarter of what Nigeria consumes. You'll be shocked that Chad only uses about 2,500 barrels a day, where Nigeria consumes about 450,000 or thereabouts. Cameroon is somewhere around 58,000. Niger is in the 25,000. Republic of Benin is about 28,000. So add all of those together, you may not be able to get to maybe just over 100,000 barrels consumed in all of these places. And so when they say that, what comes into Nigeria, that most of it get diverted, except you're saying that these fuel that gets imported into Nigeria go as far as Republic of Congo, go as far as Sudan, go as far as Mauritania, and co. So there's a lot of magic, a lot of fraud going on in that sector. Because again, we've not been able to tell exactly how much, liters per day we even consume. Is it 45 million? Is it 60 million? Is it 66 million? And sometime in June 2019, we got 90 million barrels. 90 million liters of consumption. So there's a lot of fraud, meaning that we need to get out of that space where we're being ripped off by just a few people. However, I've been warning about something. If people remember that in 2015, when President Buhari came in for the first time, he actually did remove the subsidy. And that was when petroleum prices went from 87 to 145. It was meant to be a first and full and final removal of petroleum subsidy. But what undid it? What undid that very process was that we went and devalued the currency. So whereas at 145 naira per barrel, per liter rather, when naira was doing 199, 197 officially, okay, to the dollar, that was about 80 cents. And 80 cents multiplied by 4, $3.20. In most places in the United States, they were buying, petroleum at about $3 per barrel, which was commensurate. But the moment we devalued by almost half, when naira went to 360 to the dollar, that means that the 145 naira per liter at which we were buying suddenly went back to 40 cents. And 40 cents multiplied by 4, that's about $1.60. Well, then the question became, how can we be buying our own fuel at $1.60 per gallon when they were buying at $3, $4 in the United States and so on? And so what happened next, Chamberlain, was that the NNPC started accruing what they called under recovery, because they couldn't come to the public to say, sorry, there was another subsidy developing. And people were asking them then, look, are you sure there's no subsidy? Well, there's no subsidy, but there's under recovery. What they meant by that was that they weren't recovering the total amount that they were using to bring in the crude. So if Nigeria is going to remove the subsidy, you must put a hold. It's become what they call a dilemma. Call it a trilemma, and that's what you keep managing in economics. It's become something that if you take one, you have to lose the other. So we must find ways of ensuring that not only does the Naira remain stable into the medium term, okay, but even if we can improve the value of the Naira, so that if you are removing the subsidy, for example, imagine that if the price of petrol would suddenly become 300 or 350 to the liter, all right? Know what I'm saying? If it would suddenly become that, apart from the effect, the inflationary effect on other sectors of the economy, by the time if you then devalue again, that brings in another set of inflation for people to grapple with. So we need to be extremely careful about that.
It appears to feed into what Professor Ogunkola talked about us ensuring that the monetary and fiscal policies pulled in the same direction. That when that happens, you'll get a lot more results and probably clarity in terms of what happens. But about this fuel subsidy, whether or not it should be removed, because many of them keep promising that they will do so. Do you, from what you've seen, because there are those who think that this year, what they've seen this year is that the checks and balances in the oil and gas sector doesn't just seem to hold forth. They think if we were to remove the fuel subsidy as things presently stand, because look at the diesel sector, it's regulated. 920. Look at what's going on. So if we, quote unquote, remove the fuel subsidy, can the economy hold?
Well, I mean, okay, the issue then becomes, do we want to remove it in one fell swoop? Or does the government, the incoming government, because look, it's a very touchy subject, and I'd written an article before. I said, I'm not sure any government can dare it. But it's something that needs to go because of all of the befuddlements around what exactly is going on, who is doing what, and all of that stuff. So it's going to be cataclysmic, if you ask me, in terms of the amount of inflation. Because I mean, we're already living in an economy where if government increases the price of fuel by 20%, the cost of transportation goes up by 50%, as if fuel was the only input in driving a bus. There's nothing else to spend on. So it's something that needs to be, there has to be a big meeting called, a huge stakeholder meeting. You have to do some moral suasion around, the prices of goods and services that people, and also you probably want to look at, okay, can we take out 50% of it in the meantime? However, what I'm saying, the moment you do whatever you want to do, if you also devalue, we'll be back to square zero. And at the end of the day, you would have imported a huge amount of inflation because, again, essentially, even the Dangote refinery we're talking about, they're still going to have to buy the crude at international prices anyway. And if they're having to source dollar for that, if there was something that they could do to ensure that Dangote was paying maybe a Naira equivalent for whatever it was going to get from Nigerian crude, maybe it will help, but a lot of things need to be put in place. Otherwise, as you suggested, it's going to be cataclysmic.
Let me bring in Professor Ogunkola on this matter concerning the debate about fuel subsidy, to be or not to be. Now, several other people have suggested, as part of measures to ensure that there's sanity in the oil and gas sector, first and foremost, ensure that the local transactions in that sector be done in Naira and not in dollars. So, I mean, we've heard Mr. Fashua's suggestions as to how we should proceed with the fuel subsidy subject matter. What will your recommendations be on whether or not we should outrightly remove it or not, or what exactly?
Thank you very much, Chamberlain. It's interesting. Personally, I hate subsidizing consumption. It's not a good way to develop an economy. If you must subsidize the production and give people choice to either consume or not to consume. Dr. Fashuya has mentioned important points, and they are very important. But the point is that we don't know up to today how much we are consuming in the country. We've done a study, for example, Benin Republic importing more rice than Nigeria. Can you imagine that? So policy management is very critical. So I will advocate for removing subsidy on fuel. However, we should manage the process in such a way that production that is going into this can also benefit from this so that they can produce more for us to consume. And I will decide whether I want to own 5 cars or I want to go by public transport. Not whether I am consuming fuel or not, you are taking the money from me directly or indirectly, because subsidy, whatever money you are using is for all of us. So the management of policy is what we need to get right. And if we get that right, and we can put part of whatever is to move into production, who says we should not export fuel to these other countries? So I agree that it should be removed, but let's look at the strategy that will help us not to create more problem in terms of inflation that you are talking about, or for people to resist and possibly reverse this. The issue is also when you are looking at fuel subsidy. Why do we want to remove this fuel subsidy? It's now because we are paying more on fuel subsidy than even sponsoring education and so on. The issue of governance, cost of governance, I think is what we need to face squarely. Because if you put it also by the side in terms of expenditure, then you need to do analysis. Do we really need this much to be able to run the country? Look at our capital expenditure, for example. We need to separate development-oriented capital expenditure from buying cars, servicing aeroplane and all whatnot. Some of these things we should cut down and face reality. If we don't, it's a matter of time. If you don't remove fuel subsidy, for example, I can't see us going ahead in terms of fiscal balance anymore. It's just so huge. And as I mentioned earlier on, if there is an increase in crude oil today, the price of crude oil today, the subsidy, the amount of subsidy will increase. What's supposed to be benefits to us is a cost now. So we should deal with this issue once and for all. What are the stories about the refineries? I hope, Chamberlain, you can update us on this, because there was a time they wanted to use some $1 billion or so to refurbish them. What is the story?
Yeah. All right, Mr. Dahausa, in Lagos, pardon me, Prof. Mr. Dahausa, could you talk to us briefly about this Naira redesign? Yes, it's in 2022, but it will spill over to next year. And as a matter of fact, the National Assembly are still debating this matter. We don't know what perspectives, how it will turn out eventually on the part of the CBN. Now, the World Bank they are of the opinion that timing, short transition will impact negatively on economic activities. What do you think, and how should this be approached, this Naira redesign policy?
Well, thank you. When the government announced the redesign, the business community, including the Lagos Chamber, made some comments regarding the timing and the question of contingency arrangements for foreseeable disruptions in the economy that can result from the very short period given for the process to be completed. So if the government says, the CBN says it is still this same period, but for certain foreseeable disruptions, for example, the people in the POS agent payment system who require cash as their essential fuel, the fuel of the POS business is cash. Has the CBN come out with any specific contingency arrangements? Has the CBN considered places with difficult access, the remote, very remote areas, the mountainous areas, the riverine areas, in the creeks where there are no banks? So we believe that the time may not be too long if there is recognition of foreseeable disruptions in certain areas and processes, that if the CBN were to come out to say, we recognize this and these are the arrangements, then we will probably not have any serious concerns about the time and the process. The claim by some sections that we have so much money, we can't change it in 6 weeks, we believe that some special interests matter, which is not necessarily the interest of the entire economy. But for the entire economy, we believe that CBNs should be able to say and know and accept that there are certain foreseeable disruptions just because of the nature of that business, the payment, the agent payment people, and the nature of the location. There are several places in this country where in a whole local government, you probably have just one bank in a 50-kilometer area. It's strange to hear that in Lagos, but there are parts of this country where you don't have a bank in a 20-kilometer radius. And so when you want to make these kind of changes, you want to ring fence those situations and find solutions that address them. And then there won't be a major concern about people who have stacked, pretty large volumes of money stacked somewhere and they are worried about that. I don't think the CBN should worry about that, but to look at these specific foreseeable, easily foreseeable situations and prepare for them and address them. That's our view regarding this matter.
We have spoken of the, problems 2022 and also, some of what policymakers can do, especially this administration with the time that they have, so that it impacts even the ordinary Nigerian there. We'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Wish we had more time. Mr. Gabriel Idahosa, Deputy President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Tokwe Fatu, an economist, who joined us from Abuja, also public policy scholar, and Professor Olawale Ogunkola, Professor of Economics, University of Ibadan, visiting Professor, London School of Economics in the UK. Thank you all for joining us on the program, and do have a happy new year.
Thank you.